Chapter 6: Across the Rolling Plains. The landscape stretched out in gentle undulations, open fields merging into neat farmlands. Crops swayed in the breeze. Wheat or rye, the fly couldn't know. But he sensed the rhythmic dance of the stalks as they bowed and rose again. Speckled among the fields were small villages, each bearing unique spires and gable roofs reminiscent of an old-world architecture. The fly kept a steady pace, propelled by the knowledge that each wingbeat brought him closer to dusk. Now that afternoon wore on, a faint panic clung to him. He had already lived more than half his life. But there's still so much to see, so many questions unanswered. He passed over a dusty road where a caravan of refugees trudged. These weren't uniformed soldiers, but families and solitary figures dressed in tattered civilian clothing, pushing carts loaded with personal belongings. Their faces, lined with worry, suggested they were fleeing something. Whispered words hung in the air: unrest, bombings, forced orders. The fly could feel their anxiety thrumming, as tangible as the heat rising from the road. Pausing to rest on the beam of a small roadside inn, the fly listened. A group of wary travelers sipped from tin cups, discussing rumors of a looming event. Some grand speech that could change the course of the conflict. They spoke of a man whose voice could sway entire nations. Shivers of both hope and dread threaded through their conversation. Though the fly understood none of their language, he picked up on the tension in their hushed tones and the quick glances they exchanged. Before he could glean more, the sound of marching boots interrupted. A patrol approached. Dozen men in crisp uniforms, carrying flags emblazoned with an emblem that was stark and forbidding, though never fully seen by the fly's quick eyes. Their disciplined formation made the civilians hush instantly. Fear flickered in their gazes as they stepped aside, letting the patrol pass. One of the patrolmen paused to glare at the group of travelers. A silent standoff ensued, charged with unspoken threats. Eventually, the soldier spat on the ground and led his men onward, the flag trailing behind them. The tension released in a collective exhale from the travelers. The fly darted away from the inn, unsettled by the close brush with confrontation. He soared over the soldiers, who paid him no mind, lost in their own martial choreography. They march with such discipline, the fly observed, yet they spread dread wherever they go. A flicker of understanding tugged at him. Perhaps the uniform was more than just clothing. It was a symbol of power wielded over others. The sun dipped lower, painting the plains in golden hues. The fly's vision, while not human, registered a shift in brightness. Shadows lengthened, and a subtle urgency clamped down on him. Am I closer to finding my purpose? He wondered. He recalled how the orchard encampment had mentioned a city to the east, with grand boulevards and an impending Raleigh. If the key to his questions lay anywhere, it had to be there. Picking up speed, he rode a current of warmer air. The farmland below blurred in patches of green and yellow. Occasionally, a small chapel or church spire jutted out, topped with weather vanes. The distinctive half-timbered houses reminded him that this region held deep roots. A long history he could only begin to guess at. Perhaps generations upon generations of people had tilled these fields, built these homes, lived and died here. And yet, he mused, my life is just one day. But that day, he resolved was not wasted. Already, he had witnessed a fraction of human conflict, the hush of an orchard, the anxious talk of travelers. If a purpose existed, maybe it was in observing, in taking in the gravity of a world on the brink. His wings ached, a faint sign of fatigue. Where a human might shrug off exhaustion, a fly's energy was finite. Still, he pressed on. The horizon revealed taller silhouettes now, the faint outlines of towers or smokestacks. The city was near. A cluster of small farms lay directly ahead, roads converging around a modest marketplace. He landed briefly on a signpost to catch his breath. Painted letters. He couldn't read pointed in multiple directions. A donkey with heavy saddlebags trotted by, followed by a woman leading it. She muttered anxiously about traveling. Before it's too late, clutching a small child's hand. The child looked up at the sky, noticing the fly, and smiled in that unguarded way children do. Then the pair moved on. The sight made the fly tremble. An odd sensation he couldn't name, but akin to empathy. Humans, so large and powerful compared to him, also harbored their own vulnerabilities. Even they were subject to fear, forced to flee or fight. Maybe the difference between a day, long life and a decade's long life wasn't so great after all. Everyone's time felt fragile, especially under the weight of conflict. Reinvigorated, he took flight once more. Skimming over the final stretch of farmland, he imagined the city gates, if there were any, opening before him. The promise of discovering a deeper answer propelled him forward. As the sun's rays angled lower, he wondered if he would survive until midnight, or if his life would end sooner. The thought spurred him on with even greater urgency. Soon the skyline became clearer. Smokestacks and taller buildings now blocked the final glow of the sun. The roads converged, growing wider and busier. More vehicles, some with men in uniforms, trundled along at a brisk pace. The air smelled sharper, exhaust, coal smoke, anxiety. The city waited, a behemoth of human creation. As he neared the outskirts, the fly's heart, if it could truly feel, pounded with anticipation. In the distance, he heard the low hum of a restless crowd. Unbeknownst to him, he was on the brink of the final stage of his life's journey. The stage was set for a meeting with history itself, though the fly could scarcely conceive how. One more push, he thought. Time was slipping away. But if he could just reach that central gathering, perhaps he'd glimpse the meaning he sought since morning. With a final burst of speed, he aimed for the city's looming silhouettes, ready to face whatever he might find in the narrowing margin of his fleeting existence.
Thank you so much for listening, and if you are still awake, please do me a huge favor. Just like and subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it.